Hey you, this is Jasim from CodeBand, and in this video we are going to be talking about the integration of Select2 library with Django. So we'll talk about two things, the first one being the regular Select2 dropdown and the second one being the Ajax Select2 dropdown. So if you're new to my channel, please do subscribe to my channel and click the bell icon near to it. So without any further, let's jump right into it. Alright guys, so in order to demonstrate the whole process, I have created a dummy Django project here, and I have created a new application called core. Now in this core.models.py, I have two models, as you can see, a language model and an entry model. Now the language model actually represents a list of programming languages, so such as PHP, Python, etc. And the entry model actually represents a person with his name and his favorite programming language. So we'll be actually creating a new entry so that we get the sort of fields to enter the name and the language. So the language here is a foreign key to the language model. So by default, Django will render a select box for this one, and will transform that select box into a Select2 widget. So we'll talk about the default Select2 and the Ajax Select2 as well. So I have set up the basic URL. So as you can see, this basic URL to include the core.urls, and in the core.urls I have set up a single path which goes to views.home function, which is a function based view which instantiates a form and is passed as a context variable to the home.html. So as you can see, the entry creation form here, it is pretty much a model form, as you can see, with a simple class meta and a model entry fields all. So it's just a form to actually add a new entry. So it'll have fields like the name and the language. So as you can see, the home.html, it's pretty much simple, an h1 and a form with that form.asp. Those fields are rendered, and the application itself is this one. So add an entry, name, you can type in some name and his favorite language. So this one is the default select box that is being rendered by Django. So yeah, that's pretty much it, and we'll transform this to a Select2 drop down, and let's actually start digging into that. So for Select2 to integrate into your website, all you have to do is just go to select2.org. I'll put the link in the description section so that you can go right away, and in here you can go to the installation section. Just click here on the installation section and it'll come into this page. Now here you can see two links, the CDN, the CSS, and the JavaScript. So just copy that by clicking on here and come back in your template, and at the head section below the title, just paste that in there, and we'll just say like you can of course remove this from the script from here, from the head section into the body section here before the body tag ends, or you can of course use that up at the top too. That's up to you, but I'll stick with here. I'll just migrate this to the before the body ends. And now what we are going to be doing is we also need the jQuery so that it works with the Select2. So the jQuery, I'll put the link in the description section for the CDN, and just come back in here, and in here jQuery 3.x minified, just click on the minified and you'll get the CDN as well. Just copy that, click in here and just paste that at the top here, as you can see at the top, and yeah, you're good to go with the Select2. Now in order to make this one default select to be a Select2 widget, all you have to do is just go to the Select2 documentation and click on this basic usage here. Then you'll see a basic example of how you can actually make it as a Select2. Just copy this stuff here, this one here, and I'll explain what it is. Just copy that, and at the bottom here, so before the body ends, I'll put a script tag, so script, and I'll just paste that content there. Now this is actually nothing, but I'll just get rid of this comment here. So $document.ready function. So whenever the document gets fully loaded, then execute this anonymous function. So this anonymous function, actually it is a jQuery selector here. So dollar. Now in this case, we'll just, this is actually a class where that select default select input is there. So in our case, if we look into, if you just inspect this favorite language here, you can see that it's actually the ID of ID underscore language. So we'll just copy this one, ID underscore language, and we'll just paste that in here. And instead of this dot, which represents class, we'll just add hash, which represents ID. And yeah, this one, with this one we are good to go. So if you just save and come back into our application, you can see that now it changes to a Select2 widget. So it's not looking much beautiful because of the width, because width is too low to actually show that widget there. So I'll make a style there, a quick style. So in the head section, the style tag, I'll actually take that ID underscore language, and I'll just say width to be 100%. So with this being said, you can see that it's pretty much clean. Now it's working perfectly fine. You can just type in P and it'll just sort that list, and it'll just filter that list for you. So if we type in C, then if you type in Scala, that's working. Python, it's everything is filtering, so that's totally working. Now this is the default Select2 widget. Now there is also something called the Ajax one. So if this is a sort of large list, if it has a ton of elements here, then it would not be very good to actually do the select in this manner. Instead, we'll just use the Ajax one. So the Ajax one will not have anything here, which means the list will not be pre-populated. So these contents will not be here. Instead, as soon as we start to type in, so for example, if we start to type in P, then an Ajax request will be fired and the results are fetched from the backend and it will be in here. So that's a very cool method that you could possibly try when the list is too large. So we'll look into that as well. Now these stuffs here, the Python, PHP and all that are created by me through the administration panel. I have just created before, so don't worry about that. You could of course do that in your fashion in your languages list as well. So we'll just move into the Ajax one. So and the Ajax, as far as the Ajax one is concerned, the process is a little bit different, the implementation. So first we need to get rid of these things here. We don't want these to be pre-populated here. So we'll get rid of these things. So in our forms.py, what we are going to be doing is in the def in the init function. So the as soon as the entry creation form is instantiated, it will call the init function. So in the init function, we'll just override that init function, and it has the args and quarks. And what we are going to be doing is we'll first call the super init. So the super call is important because the base implementation in the model form will not be executed if we didn't call the super implementation. And we'll just pass in the args and the quarks. And now what we are going to be doing is we'll just fetch the field. So we'll fetch the, as you can see, the model, the field is language. So what we are going to be doing is we'll make the language query set to be empty or none, so that none of these options will be displayed in the form. So for that, what I will do is I'll just say self dot fields. So the fields of language, we are fetching the language field. So the name comes from this one, this one here, language, and dot query set. So the query set is actually responsible for displaying these stuffs here, these kind of all the objects in the language model. So we'll set this to be language dot objects dot none. So which means actually this language field is a foreign key to the language model. So by default all these things come from the language model, the objects of language model. So what we have done here is we just fetched that language field and its query set, and we put that to none, which means none of the things are displayed. So with this being said, if we look into the application itself, you can see that nothing is there. So that's working perfectly fine. Now as soon as we start to type in any character, it'll just go to the database, it'll just fetch those things, and it'll just populate the list here according to whatever we type in here. So a nice example will be here if we just go to select2.org. Sorry, if we just go to the select2.org, the official link there, and if you just come back, you can see using Ajax here. So just click on that and you can see that this example here, this nice little example where they search for the GitHub repository. So as soon as we start to type in something, for example, if I type in A, it goes to that backend and fetches all those repositories that starts with A, and it just displayed it here. So this is the nice little example of the Ajax one. So we'll be doing something very similar to this one. So in our case, it will be like that list of languages there. So for that, the code, actually I have created a repository for this one. So in here, if you I'll put the link in the description section so that you can follow along. You can see that there is a select2 Ajax script. So I'll just copy and paste this snippet here, and I'll explain what it is in a moment. So I'll just copy that, and I'll just come to our PyCharm, our template, our home.html. Now instead of this regular one, what we are going to be doing is we'll just we'll just paste that in here. So you can see that it's the implementation is a little bit different. So in the select2, it will pass an object, and the key is Ajax, and it has again an object with the URL. Now the URL actually is the kind of where to go if the user starts to type in. So where to go, which URL to go. So the URL home is actually our URL, as you can see, the name with home, the same only one URL I'm using. So I'll just go to that URL, and the data type of receiving is JSON. And this one, I'll talk about this one, what it is in a moment. So before that, as soon as we start to type in something, it will just fire an Ajax request to this URL. So this URL will actually go to views.home, this function, and it'll come to this function, and herein we need to actually take those values that starts with whatever the user typed in. So for example, if the user starts to type in with P, then we need to actually return a JSON data that of all the languages that starts with P. So for that, I'll just first check if the request is Ajax. So if it is Ajax request that is coming in, then what I'm going to be doing is I'll just take all those languages. So I'll just say like languages is equal to the language, which is the model, the language model here, dot objects dot all, and dot filter. I'll just filter based on whatever the user typed in. So dot filter, and we'll just filter based on whatever the user typed in. So as you can see in the Ajax documentation, you can see that the request parameters, they'll pass something like term, which is actually the current search term in this search box. So we'll filter our language model based on this term. So in order to understand the concept, I'll just print request dot get the term. So I'll just fetch that term, that field having the name term. So you can see that if I actually starts, if I refresh this one, and if I starts to type in P, if we look into the console, you can see that P is there. If I starts in PY, then PY is there. So we'll fetch this one from the term, and we'll filter our languages based on this one. So we'll just say like the term is equal to this one, whatever the user typed in, and dot filter. Now the filter will actually filter based on the title. So back in here, I'll just say title underscore underscore I contains. So if the title contains this term, then fetch that one, otherwise discard that one. Now the I stands for case insensitive. So whatever the user typed in caps or lowercase, it doesn't matter. So I contains, then the term. So with this being said, all those languages that matches will be in the languages list. And what we will do is, in order to return the response, the JSON response, we need to actually make it in a format like this one. So a list of objects. So the object will have something like the ID. So the ID will be the ID of that language. So for example, I'll put this as 1, for example, and the language will be like title. Title is equal to colon for example Python. In this format we want to return the response. So I'll just copy this one again and this one. So this is the sample format that we are going to be returning the response. So for that we have actually a method called values in the query set. So I'll just say something like response content is equal to the languages dot values. So these values will actually make our query set in the form that I have shown you before. So if you just print this response content, you can see that that here in action. So if I just refresh this one and come back in here and start to type in P, then you can see that this is the kind of format that we have shown you. So this is perfect. Now we'll just return the response here. So before returning the response, we need to actually make a list out of it. So I'll just say like list of. Now this is very important because this is now a query set class. So we need to make a list of this one, so that it is if you just save that, and if you just type in something, you can see that I'm sorry, if you just type in P, then you can see that it is a list of objects. So it's perfect. Now we'll just return that response JSON. So just say like return JSON response of. Now you need to import the JSON response up at the top, and we'll just say like the response content and flat, not flat, safe is equal to false. Now this is because the JSON response actually needs the content to be dictionary, so it will not allow a list to be in there. So in order to override that, we need to just pass safe equal to false, and this will do the trick. Now with this being said, if I just save that, and if I just come back in here, and if I just start to type in P, you know, what do you know? You got that P starting with P every languages. Now if we start to C, then those C, C++. If we start in Python, we got that stuff. Now everything is totally working fine. This is the power of the Ajax Select2 box. Now one thing I missed to note there is in the home.html, you can see the process results here. Now this is because we need this one, because it will actually the Select2 the underlying Select2 library expects the data to be returned in this format. So I'll just paste the format in here. So for example, I'll just paste the format in the views. So in the views, if we come back in here, it needs something like in this format, results, and I'll just put this in quotes, and it is a list of the objects that we pass in. So the object should have the ID, and the ID whatever we passed in, and also instead of the title, so our field has name title. Instead of title, it needs to have the text, that there text, so the key as text, and the kind of language, Python or similar. So this is a format that Select2 is expecting. So we need to pass, in order to parse that, in order to get into that, we need to actually make this process results here. It just maps, it just loops through the data that gets into there, and it's just make a new list out of that, a new object in this format as well. So with that being said, that's okay. Now minimum input length is actually if you just starts to type in 1 character, then only the Ajax request will be fired. If we change this to 2, then 2 characters are required to fire the Ajax request. Now this one totally works fine. You can see those Ajax requests being fired and the data being returned. But the problem starts when we actually type in, when we actually add a new entry. So for example, if I start to type in a dummy name and a list past the favorite language, and if I submit, then nothing is, I believe, returned. So if we just go into our admin panel, and if I refresh the entry here, you can see that nothing is there, no entry is being created. Now that's because the validation error is also not showing. Now that's because I'll just quickly make that logic here. So if request.method is equal to post, so if it is post, then we'll instantiate the form to be entry creation form of a request.post with the data being request.post. And if I just say like if form dot is valid, if it is valid, then we'll actually say form.save, and if it is and we'll just return redirect, so redirect back to the same page, the home, and I'll just import that redirect up at the top, as you can see. And if it is not the case, if it is not valid, then we'll return that, we'll render that home.html again, but this time with the validation errors. So if I just go to that page again, and if I refresh and start to type in some name, and if I for example start B, then if I submit, then you can see that select a valid choice. That choice is not one of the available choices. Now the validation fails. Now that's because in the forms.py, what we have actually done is we have set the query set to be none. So whatever comes in from here will be evaluated with whatever it is there in the query set. So here it is none, no elements is there, and here we just entered the Python there, and so it does not match. The Python is not included in the query set, so this one would actually fail to validate there. So that's why the error here. So we need to make a fix to that. So if the user is actually posting the data, or if the user is actually submitting the data, then we need to actually make this one to the previous one, which means the language.objects.or. So for that, what we are going to be doing is we'll just check like in the init method itself, we'll just check like if the language, so the language is the name of that field, in request in the sense in self.data. So what this does is the self.data is actually if you look in the views, the self.data is actually this one, request.post. So if the method is post, which means if the user has submitted the form, then the data attribute will be the request.post. So in that request.post, if there is something called language, if that language field is there, then we'll just make this language query set to be language.objects.all. So with this being said, it will totally work fine if we just go back in here, and if we just type in some dummy data, and if we just say Python and submit, then if we look into the admin panel, that is being entered there. So that's working perfectly fine. Now there is one more issue. Suppose if you are going to be updating this sort of so for example, if you are updating this one with an ID, I believe, of 1 or 2, whatever be, if you want to update this one, so if we just go to this page, then it should show the name and the favorite language of this one, since we are going to be updating. So for that, I'll just tweak this form here to have that instance equal to the language.objects. I'll just say first, so the first item we are going to be updating. So if this is the case, then you shall see those data in here, but I believe you can't see that data. That's because it said that to be the language. It's actually entry, because we are making an entry, right? This is an entry creation form. So entry.objects.first, if I refresh, then you can see that name is there, but the language is still not there. Now that's because if you look into the forms again, now in this case by default, if we just instantiate the form without the data, now this is the instance, this is the data. If data is there, then it will just go to this this if condition. Otherwise it will just make that query set to be none. So since the query set is none, those pre-populated or the this value will not be there. So we need to make a fix to that as well. So I'll just select elif. If this is not the case, then elif instance, sorry for that, elif self dot instance, which means if the instance is set, so in this case it will go to that elif statement because the instance is set. And if it is set, then we are going to be updating, right? So we need to populate that this value in the select2 box as well. So for that we'll just say query set is equal to, now instead of all, because we don't need all those things, but we need just the Python itself, the selected one. So for that we'll just say like all dot filter, will filter based on the we'll just say like title. I believe we need to filter like we'll just say like pk is equal to, so filter the id, the primary key is equal to the self dot instance. So the self dot instance will be an entry instance. If you look into the instance, it is actually an entry instance. So self dot instance dot language dot pk. So this will do the trick. Now what this does is self dot instance is an entry object, so whatever this one is, so the entry dot objects dot first, whatever it returns, that will be the self dot instance. And dot language is actually we are fetching the language field there, and again we are fetching language dot pk, so the primary key. Now with this being said, if I just go in there, and you can see, what do you know, we got that Python there. So that's totally working fine. Now we can actually update this one to be for example PHP, and I'll just update this script as well, which means in the views.py we need to actually make this request.post, and the instance is equal to the same exact stuff. I'll copy and paste. So we're explicitly saying that to be just for example. So if I just refresh that, and I'll just make this to be PHP, and if I submit, then what do you know, it actually returned a redirect. So if I just refresh this one, I change it to PHP. So that's totally working fine. So everything is totally working fine. Now this is all about the Ajax one, a little bit of slightly more logic than the default one, but it still gives you a good grasp on how you can alter the forms and all. And for the actual the code snippet I have in the Select2, I have that logic in here, so you can just copy and paste instead of typing all those things there. And yeah, that's pretty much about it. Now if you like the video, please leave a star on the GitHub repo, and please give a star on the video as well. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please do subscribe to my channel and click the bell icon near to it. So yeah, that's it guys, thank you for watching. We'll see you in the very next one.